All right. So I guess today is election day. So we wanted to just have a Tuesday sort of talking about like what this day means, sort of the importance of it, and like also just highlighting like how politics and like election day and voting, like how we can use that as a way to like uplift our communities. Um, so yeah, I'm really excited. It's crazy to me that like a year ago today was like the big election, the big presidential election, because that was such a hectic day. And it's just like crazy that it's been a year. So also just like using this day to like reflect on like how have things changed in the past year? Is there any progress? Are we going in the right direction? Just like things like that. Um, so yeah, I guess the way I want to like start today is just having our panelists introduce themselves. If you could just give your name and then share like your connection to like politics. So if you work in politics, if you're majoring in a political sort of concept, or yeah, just a little brief, like one or two sentences about like why politics are important to you or how you're involved in them. So, um, yeah, whoever wants to start, maybe Priscilla, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, of course. Okay, so I'm Priscilla Beltran. I use she, they pronouns. I'm a sophomore here at Emerson, and I study political communications with minors in pre-law and economics. So I've been involved in politics since about sophomore year of high school, freshman sophomore year of high school. I started working with my city councilman as involved with like politics and like city council politics and school board. And I actually really kind of fell in love with like school board elections and electing student board of trustees and everything that goes around like local politics and things of that sort. And I've served on a couple campaigns working as like a political consultant. And for the last campaign I worked with, I actually was the director of outreach and their social media, which was really cool. And so I really fell in love with it. And I was like, this is something that I can do for the rest of my life, just making this difference in my community. And so I came to Emerson, and now I'm studying exactly what I want to do and getting involved in exactly what I want to do. And yeah, that's where I'm at. After this, I'm actually going to go try to poll greet or just walk around the polls and see what's going on. Hopefully I can get involved somehow. This will be my first time getting involved in like politics that's not in Dallas, which is where I'm from, Dallas, Texas. So I'm excited. I'm real excited. It's election day.
Who would like to go next?
I could go ahead. Hi, everyone. My name is Helena Bourbano. I also use she and they pronouns. I actually was born in the Bronx, raised in Florida, and then moved back up to moved back up to the Northeast, I guess, but actually settled in Massachusetts. My family's in New York still. And a little bit about my background is I want to say like most of it has been in political work, which is funny because I actually wanted to go to like music school, which got vetoed by my mom, but that didn't end up happening. So I ended up going to liberal arts college and getting into the political science field. So fast forward, I also got my master's in public administration, and I really want to say that I got my start doing voter engagement and voting rights work on like a national basis. So like I actually have predominantly done national work, which is weird. So I've done, I want to say, more work in places like North Carolina, Michigan, Georgia, other places that are not Massachusetts. So doing that kind of civic engagement, political engagement work, and then on the side, also doing this more partisan piece, because my part in the voter engagement space was more around working with marginalized communities, particularly low income, immigrant, AAPI specifically, and other communities of color, and working with different nonprofits to figure out how to get their constituents more engaged in the political process. So there was that sort of nonpartisan piece, doing the partisan piece on the side, because that was really exciting me. And then I just continued to do that, some political consultant work. And then I actually stepped down this year, but I was the first national political director for an org called New American Leaders, which is the only nonprofit that trains progressive new Americans specifically to run for office. And I actually have transitioned into the philanthropic space, not really leaving the political space though. So I'm also helping another nonprofit on the side kind of scale their program that really focuses on AAPI women leaders on a national scale. So helping folks to incubate political leadership. So that's kind of my background, kind of musical theater kid who ended up doing political work. And I will pass it to Sharon.
Thanks, Helena. I swear I have met you before. Did you do one of the trainings for Emerge?
I did.
That's how I know you. I am an Emerge. I was like, I know her. And I'm like, I'm not going to Google because I'm going to like take that part of my brain and I'm going to
figure it out.
I'm going to try super, super hard.
Because I saw your last name and I was like, we have been in a space together and I can't put my finger on it.
I'm so happy I made space for this today. This day has been just, a crazy one. Oh, wow. This is amazing. So I am, I don't know if y'all know what Emerge is, but it is specifically catered to Democratic women to run for office. I did not run for office this year. As you can see, I am sitting here, but I am the inaugural access and equity coordinator through the say a lot of I'm very tired. The career leadership, the career development center at Emerson. And I'm also working on being able to, well, it actually did start, but there is a human rights committee in my town, which is really great. So I'm helping them with a lot of the work, a lot of the engagement, a lot of the conversation. And I love municipal elections because everyone thinks they mean nothing, but they mean so much. Because in your like little tiny town, your little or your big city, a lot of those leaders really do influence so much of the legislation. So I wake up excited every election day and I tell my kids, I have 3 kids under 7 and I'm like, it's voting day. And they're like, they have no idea what it is. They think I'm going on a boat each time and it's very cold. But it's super exciting. And I've like shown them like what a ballot looks like and how everyone's voice really counts, especially in those elections where there's like such little engagement, your voice like really, really matters. So I love election day and I'm so happy to be here and I can't wait to learn from y'all.
Tamia, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I am Tamia Jordan. I am with Intercultural Student Affairs. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. Let's see. Growing up, my family, especially my mother, was very politically engaged. I'm from New Jersey originally. She worked for first Congressman Torricelli and then eventually Senator Torricelli. And then when I went to undergrad, I studied at the University of Virginia. We don't call anything what everybody else calls it. So at UVA, it was called government with a focus in American politics. And we had internships and externships. And externships were the ones that happened over winter break and spring break. And so I did a number of those on the Hill, primarily with folks from Jersey, and initially primarily with Senator Torricelli. And then fast forward, I made a decision later on in life to not go into politics. And actually that was very specifically because of my time that I spent on the Hill. I was disenchanted. I actually was on the floor of the Senate when Bill Clinton was being impeached. And I had my ticket because I was doing an externship at the time. Anyway, so there was just a lot going on. The phone calls that I was answering, I was just very disillusioned and disenchanted with the experience. And so fast forward, I decided to study higher ed, but, have always kept my foot or toe, or maybe even like half my body involved in, just civic issues, primarily issues related to mass incarceration and ending mass incarceration, and certainly supporting folks who are incarcerated and formerly incarcerated. And that has put me in a number of places where I'm interacting with political folks, district attorneys. I get very involved in district attorney races. That's my passion because they make such a huge difference in terms of the issues that, that are just extremely important to me. I guess I could say more, but I'll just add more later. But it has been a wild ride. I have a lot of friends who are directly involved in politics as well, and I invited them to be here today. And a few of them are Emerson alumni, but they are working hard. And today is a big day for them. So one or two might try to pop in, but they might not be able to. They might not be able to make it.
Amazing. I did not know that story. That's crazy. I had no idea that you were on the Senate floor for that. That's really wild.
I'll bring my ticket in, which I wasn't supposed to take. Like literally I was told not to take it, but I was like, I have to take this. This is a freaking souvenir.
That's so awesome. You could probably like sell that. I mean, like don't.
I won't.
But like I'm just saying that's like a museum piece, honestly. But I guess then I'll also introduce myself. I'm Clarissa. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'll be like moderating, but also I'm a political communications major. So, I also have some things to say about like politics and stuff. I'm minoring in pre-law, so not really sure how I want to what I want to do exactly yet, but I worked with Andrea Campbell for a year. I was a fellow for her campaign. And I also I'm an intern for a nonprofit now, which works a lot with also like mass incarceration, homicide, community harm, specifically with like women. And so that involves like creating a lot of like policy and like research, and has like connections to politics because there's certain things we like advocate for, and we want like politicians to sort of like recognize. And we've had like different politicians and like people running for city council like come to our events and things like that, because obviously it's like important. We want some of like our main like talking points to be passed. And just I think yesterday we found out that Boston created a fund for community harm, which is really amazing. That's a new thing. And that was like also like, in part like us like doing research and like talking to like different politicians and things like that. So super cool. And yeah, I'm not like super into the whole like politics in terms of like, it just like obviously there's so many like there's a lot of depth to it. Like I'm really interested in sort of like the back scenes of politics, like like the like issues that we need to work on and like advocacy more so than like a campaign, like helping a campaign. Even though in the end that like does like kind of all connect, but I'm more interested in like the sort of like policy aspect and just like advocacy and stuff like that. So yeah. Okay. So I'm just so excited. I love this. This is like such a like politic nerd. So this is great. But I guess we could start with some questions. So today is election day, as we know. And so I guess I want to know what you guys think the election like means for Boston, this election that's happening today. And also, is it fair to say that with the results of the mayoral and city council election, we may have hope for a more equitable community in Boston? So if anyone wants to take a stab at that.
I can start. So let's see. Let me work backwards. I'll just first say that I always have hope. You know, this is who I am, and it's why I get involved and do the things that I do. And I am also extremely disillusioned and extremely just I've seen, you know, some of the inner workings, and I have seen some of the negotiations. Like, I've been in the room for some of them, and the things that one would think would be obvious because they directly impact really the humanity of everyone, but especially the humanity of folks who are, you know, marginalized, or who, you know, come from communities that have been disenfranchised. And the it's really it even really good people, really good folks who have really good intentions, you know, they're the compromises that have to be made sometimes, and a lot of the times I'll say, can result in, you know, just business as usual, and or I would say, you know, justice delayed, which, you know, the phrase justice delayed is justice denied. And so I've just seen that way too many times. And going a little further backwards to your question, but this is a really powerful, you know, election, especially the mayoral election here. You know, we're going to have a woman of color who's going to be our mayor, and that's really awesome. I'll be honest, I was disappointed that we didn't have a Black woman in the, you know, in the running, in the mix. I feel like that is very Boston for that to happen. But I'm also really excited about, I'll just say at least one of the candidates that is in the race currently. And so I think that that is also huge. So I tend to not look at things as sort of, you know, either or, black and white, but kind of all everything together. And so when I look at it, I see hope. I also have a realistic sort of thing going through me that's saying, you know, just temper your expectations. Like, even for these women of color who I know want to do tremendous work. You know, I know that they're going to do tremendous work. They're going to be powerful, and they're going to, like, you know, they're going to nudge us forward. No question about it. And it's going to take a lot more time for us to see some, you know, real material change and relief in the ways that I think we want to.
I think I could piggyback off that. I mean, I would say that you kind of mirror my feelings exactly. I was really disappointed that Boston during the primary. I was actually super bummed. It really should have been a Black woman and someone else. Like, that's how I felt at the end of the day. And I feel comfortable saying that my pick did not get there. So, you know, it was one of the two Black women. But I am always have that spark of hope. Like, I'm a little older than the two students on the call, but my first election was like 2008. So when Barack Obama ran on that message of hope, and even though I'm so cynical as I've grown into the work, I still kind of go back to how I felt when I was super inspired by someone. But the me now has sort of that perspective, like, it's just not what it looks like in practice. And even the best person with the best agenda has to deal with people who do not have the same agenda. So they might not get the outcome you actually want. But I think having that expectation, because that's just how life works. Like, I don't think that we're ever going to have like a homogeneous, like, for like me, people are just like, oh, but Helena, you personally identify as a socialist. I'm like, yes, I personally identify as a socialist. Do I think that because of my work, I'm not sure that that will happen in practice, even though I like hope for it. Like, let's keep on pushing to get to that place where everyone has collective liberation, but also have, like, you know, like, it's policy, it's bureaucracy, like, you're not necessarily going to get what you want. But we could try to get closer there. But I am excited to see about the result of the election. I am excited to see hopefully the more progressive candidate win. And I'm interested to see how old versus new Boston kind of plays out, because they've kind of divided their camps between the two candidates, between quote unquote old and new Boston. So I'm excited for it. I'm hopeful, but I have very tempered expectations.
I think I would go next. Yeah, no, it's gonna, no matter who wins, we're gonna have a woman of color as Boston mayor, which is a win. Yeah. So Clarissa and I saw Stacey Abrams a week or so ago, and she said this line that really resonated with me. She said, I'm a Black Democrat from the South. I'm not an optimist. And I think I kind of hold the same sentiment of I'm a progressive Mexican from Texas, and every single time we've had, like, I've been so excited for a candidate, or I've been, so excited for progress and stuff, it always ends up falling short. And I don't know, I think I've just been let down a lot in politics. And I also took this class called Post-Racial America my freshman year, and that really messed me up. It really messed me up. It really messed me up. It was like, oh yeah, you think things have progressed. No, it hasn't. It really hasn't. I don't know. I think, like everybody was saying, you can elect progressive candidates. You can elect people that are really good and stuff like that. But once you elect them, it doesn't always work out, because there's factors that are moving against them. There are people who, decisions being made that we don't see, and a whole bunch of stuff that's going on and stuff. And so, like, I'm optimistic. Like, I went to a forum the other day to hear both candidates talk, and I was like, oh yeah, well, this is really nice in theory, but I don't see that really happening in Boston. So I guess that's kind of, I have like doses of optimism and then just like a whole bunch of realism going on.
Yeah, I guess like just with like what everyone said, I also I was a fellow for Andrea Campbell, so I was like really tirelessly like rooting for her and working because I was just like, this is amazing. Like she was really like working to make sure that like Boston was like more equitable, and I think that's like what we need. And something from Stacey Abrams that she said, I have the quote right here, is she said, people don't care about your politics, they care about their lives. How are you going to help them? And it's like, I was just thinking, like, the people who were voting for Andrea, it's like they cared about how she was going to help their lives. And people that voted for her in general, it's people who care about the lives that she was working to protect, that have been constantly neglected in politics. And unfortunately, Boston is just like not at the point where people have that sort of, they're still ignorant to how people are oppressed and how Boston isn't equitable. And so that's why they voted for other candidates that I would say aren't necessarily on that agenda of making Boston as equitable as it can be, and making sure that we can have less of a sort of like wealth gap that exists in Boston and the segregation that exists within Boston. And I remember I was getting signatures like a few months ago, and there was this like one guy who came up to me on the street because I was telling him about sort of like Andrea's agenda, and this like white man, he was like, well, you're going to take away my money, and I don't want that. Like, that's not like, what does equity mean? And he was just like saying, like, I've worked so hard for my money, and like, I don't feel like I should get any of my money taken away to help like poor communities. And that just like kind of struck me as like, yeah, like we have a lot of work to do here, and it's like people are still sort of trapped in like this ignorant mindset. And I'm excited for this election because I'm pretty certain I can say, like, at least like from what the polls are showing, that Michelle Wu is going to win. And I think that that in itself could be like a step towards just people opening their eyes a little bit. Like, I mean, I don't know. It's hard to be hopeful in the way things have been, but like Boston, if you look at all of the mayors they've had in the past, they don't look like her. And that is just like amazing in itself. It's like it's representation. It's like a representation that we haven't had. And like, I think personally, this election is so important because once people, you know, we have a certain discourse about how we view a mayor of Boston. And by having someone different, it's starting a new sort of vision and new place of representation for what a mayor can look like in Boston. And I think that in itself is just so important as like the beginning of a start of like how we can continue to grow that. So I guess for me, like that's how I think this like election can be impactful and hopefully like change people's sort of vision of what a mayor looks like, because they've obviously had it be so the same copies of these white men for so long. So yeah. If anyone wants to add anything, if not, I'll move on to the next question. That's cool. Okay. What do I have here? Okay, so yes, in Boston, voter turnout is like very low. And I guess I'm wondering what, as like people who work in politics or like involved in politics, how do you think we can work on voter turnout, especially in communities with low turnout rates? And like, what can we do to make sure these communities feel like their elected officials will care about their communities? Like, how can we make them care about voting?
I guess that's my bread and butter. That's where I started in. I mean, you can't make anyone do anything, and it's a lot longer of a process than one wants it to be, especially folks who are more highly educated, because I've been in very like in a fundraising space, kind of like wealthy, progressive, predominantly white donors. And they're like, I just don't get why blah, 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 X marginalized community doesn't vote. And I just have to, you know, kind of have my cringe emoji. I'm like, well, it's because like there's a lot of barriers and there's a lot of nuance as to why certain communities are not involved. So I'll give you the example, like working with immigrant communities, the Asian American, the Latinx community, even the Black immigrant community as well. Like one part is language barrier, right? Like that's something that I feel like we talk about, but we don't really talk about, like, and it's not required unless there's a certain threshold of a language to have a bilingual ballot, right? That's one piece. In some areas, as you're seeing in Georgia, like there's laws put in place, in Texas, rigid voter ID laws, purging of voter registration. So I think that there's a lot of also policy that could be put in place to make it easier. Some folks have same day reg. Some people have automatic voter registration. Say what again, Priscilla, if you want to unmute. Or
oh no, you said Texas has really rigid voter laws. I was like, you say that again. That's so valid.
Yes. I was like, I don't know what I was saying. No, but totally, like even when I went down to Texas to observe doing voter registration work, like I couldn't really help because you had to get like a certification, if I recall, in that state. So there's just a lot, and some polling stations are also far away. So people have to drive to go there. What if you're working and that doesn't fit within your hours? What if you don't have time to drop things off at the post office? Like things should just be easier. Actually, one silver lining of the pandemic for voting specifically is they they did make it easier to vote in certain cities, right? Where there were like drop-off boxes, right? And I believe so, like you just drop in your ballot, which is great. But that's more on the policy side, but like, why don't people want to vote? And it's because of, like, I would say number one, sometimes it's really hard. And for people who are more privileged, they don't see those barriers because they just don't have that lived experience. They haven't seen it. And there's also me working with immigrant community, so I'm super passionate about this, is literally like trauma they don't want to vote because of trauma. And it's like looking back to the generations like, oh, when I was in my home country, there were like you could have a gun pointed at you for not participating, or there was election rigging in my country, and that's kind of like passed over. Like, why would you want to participate if it's associated with harm and trauma, right? And it's like also getting over, not even getting over, like it's moving past that, right? Or being able to move past that. And sometimes that takes multiple conversations. Sometimes it takes laws that folks don't know about. Like I was talking to a person that I forgot what crime they had committed, but they weren't like formally, I can't think of the word and I don't want to use the wrong one, but they weren't part of, they weren't formally charged yet. And they were like, am I allowed to do this? Will I go to jail if I do this? And there's a lot of like, and it's different in every state too. So then they don't know. And then they're like, I don't know if I can participate. So there's that incarceration piece too, and how they get access to the vote or don't get access to the vote. But I'm going to stop there because I'm going to keep going through every law and every nuance of like things that I've seen. But there's just a lot more barriers than folks with privilege typically see. And that's why folks don't vote. That's half of it. And plus the other stuff we all talked about before, that politicians say things and they don't really mean it. So I'm gonna stop there.
No, 100%. There's so many barriers that people don't know about, or they just don't acknowledge, or I don't know. Whenever I think of like the barriers of voting, I like to think about my family, because a lot of the people in my family, they have a really hard time voting. Like my father was recently released from incarceration, so he can't vote. And like my grandmother, I'm always the one that's like taking her to the polls, because like she's not somebody that my like a campaign would reach out to, so she doesn't really know, or something like that. I don't know. There's just like a lot of things that I think of in specifically within like my realm of like Texas voting and stuff like that, that there's just like a lot of barriers. And I know that's kind of like that happens everywhere. There's just like a lot of barriers. And I know like Stacey Abrams was talking about that as well, when she was talking about like, oh, like they didn't let this person vote because their signature didn't look the same as when they were 18, or they didn't let this person vote because of an ID, or, you know, something like that. And it's so frustrating. And it's not that like, I think a lot of the times whenever I'm in these spaces of when I was working on campaigns and we were doing like fundraisers, or we were coming together and talking about like why voting matters and stuff like that, it was always like a frustration. Like, why aren't these people coming out to vote? Why aren't these people coming out to vote? Don't they know how important this is? Like, yeah, they know how important this is. There's just a lot of barriers that is preventing them. And I think it's just a lot of like finger pointing and blame and like scapegoating, like, oh, we lost this because that community didn't come out to vote, or, oh, we could be more progressive, but you know, that one community doesn't come out to vote, and stuff like that. So it's just a lot of scapegoating and finger pointing and stuff like that, that often gets placed on by like people who are more privileged and have that privilege to vote.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I can really add anything new. You hit on so many points. One thing, you know, that I've heard in the past is that also polling places where people of color live tend to have the longer wait lines, tend to have, you know, less staffing. And if folks are, you know, like wage workers, and they have, you know, a set amount of time that they that they can vote, that can be a deterrent. Also access, and then think about access to transportation relative to that as well. So if you need to get someplace quick and get out quick, so much of it comes down to resources and economics. And we know that there's still the relationship between between certainly race and social class. And that's not to say that only people of color experience financial challenges, but certainly we do at a higher proportion. And so all of these like little things, they add up. I won't even start talking about anything related to folks who are returning citizens who have been incarcerated. That's the whole nother conversation that can, anyway, that, yeah. So there's that. And then, and of course that especially impacts the Black community because, we're over policed and over incarcerated. And then also, voter ID, you all spoke about this as well. Like, so many states have changed or are changing, their voter ID laws. And it's always been the case that folks who look like us don't necessarily always have the right papers, like that's something that's been used against us over and over and over again. And so that continues, and it only gets worse when those laws change. And then also it makes it confusing as well. So you go and you're expecting like, oh, last year I was able to do A, B, C, D, and now I can't. Now I have this frustration. I feel like I'm experiencing this discrimination. Now I don't want to be a part of the process. So there's so many things. I'm gonna stop. Let's talk about something happy.
Yeah, no, like I'm just like jumping off of like everything all of you said. I could literally talk about this for like an entire day, like just standing up in a room, just be like this state, because it's just like everywhere. And like I specifically like think about Florida and Georgia because I've been living in Florida, and there's literally like a poll tax for incarcerated individuals in Florida. Like they were like, oh yeah, well, you have to pay all of these fees right after jail, even though we're not going to give you a job because you were in jail. And it's like, so there's a disproportionate rate of people of color who are incarcerated because the police force in Florida is racist. And now you're taking away their right to vote. And it's like, it's so just like gross, honestly. And it's like, these are the same people who are like, we need to have like follow the Constitution and like democracy. And it's like, hello, you're saying this, but the Constitution literally has a part that says you can't have a poll tax. But by doing these little loopholes that you do, and by saying that people can't buy food for people in line who are voting, you're literally just making it so difficult for people to do what you're preaching. And that just like makes me so angry because it's so ironic, and it's just clear that these people are racist and they only want some people going out. And like Stacey Abrams was like saying when we were at her talk, she was like, I didn't win because the person I was running against was in charge of like counting the polls. And they were able to make so many different little loopholes that the people who were voting for me, they didn't have the right ID with the right picture. Their signature wasn't on the right place. And it's like these little like tiny things that people didn't know because there's not a lot of like voter education. We don't really learn about how to like vote in school. That how are you supposed to know to do that? There's no one helping you. And so it just makes me just like so upset. And it's like there's obviously like a lack of trust within these communities. Like why should we trust you when we are continuing to be neglected? And there's just a lot of community care, I think, that needs to be done also by politicians. Like I think these politicians need to be going out into these communities as much as they can and like really giving them the care and listening to what they need versus sort of just like predicting it. So yeah, that's definitely like my sort of take on it. Like we just need to give our communities, especially our communities of color, a lot more just like love, and hopefully that will start to happen a little bit. And we need to start making voting easier. I know like my nonprofit, we have Lyft codes. We got a donation from Lyft and we put it on our Instagram. And we're like, if you need a ride to the poll, here's a Lyft code. It's going to be free. That way they have free transportation to the polls. So things like that, hopefully there's more of that because it's really necessary. And I guess just, oh my gosh, how is it already 12:47? But I guess just like kind of wanting to end like what I have to say about this with like another thing Stacey Abrams said. I wrote so many notes. It was amazing. But she said, voting is medicine. You have to take it again and again. We have to stop pretending that things will get better because we get new people. We have to do it over and over again. And I just think that was like, that really stuck with me, because it was just like, yeah, like it doesn't, like one person elected, like what is that really going to do? We need to, as I said, like this representation, we need to keep it going. So just like that sort of like idea of like voting being medicine, I think that's really cool. So yeah. Okay, so I guess
Clarissa, can I just say one thing? I'm gonna just soapbox for just 2 seconds about, because something that you all were saying, I was trying to skip the conversation about, the carceral system and voting. But one thing I do want to say is like, that's why I'm so passionate about like DA races, because they really can have an impact on a community's relationship, like their reliance on the carceral system. And so by shifting folks away and shifting folks to alternatives, then we can sometimes, or at least minimize, reduce, like skirt those laws that make it such that folks who have, certain types of convictions, felonies, etc., don't lose their right to vote. And so that's one of the reasons why I get so like hype about DA elections, like specifically, but all elections matter.
yeah, no, and I think that also just brings up the point that it's like also like I think there's such a heavy emphasis on like presidential elections, and obviously presidential elections like matter as well, but there's not enough emphasis on these like local elections and like what your DA can do and what your city councilor can do and how important they are to that system. And I think those are the elections that really are just so important, but are so unrecognized in a sense. There's a much higher turnout rate for presidential elections than there are for, the mayor election and things like that. So just sort of bringing up that point. And then
Can I say something real quick before we move on? Heavy on that, because like I've seen some local elections where a race has literally been decided by like one vote, like one vote. Like that was like, say like it was like 50-50, it was like 50-51 or something like that. It's like one vote. Like in local elections, the voter turnout is so low because people don't think that it's as important as like voting for like your president or something like that, or that it's not as impactful, or it's not really like important. It's just like something, something like, whatever. But it's like, it's so important, and your vote is like threefold times important, because like it's literally like your one vote can decide a race. Like literally, I've seen it happen. It's very important. Okay, that's all I wanted to say.
no, for sure. I'm loving this. But I guess we only have 10 minutes left. So I kind of want to end this on like a more like positive, happy note. So I'm going to like kind of combine two of my questions, but if you could give like just like a few things that you think should be the next mayor's top priorities, as well as what your goals are for your own like political path, and like as a person interested in politics, what you hope you can do, what you hope you can do.
I'll go super quick, even though I'm like never quick. Closing the racial wealth gap. Like that is such a huge priority, especially in New England, in Boston, in like, it just, yeah, I'll leave that there. And I personally don't have political aspirations, but I love to support folks who do. And, I will continue to, one thing I will say is that, so I'm the co-chair for the community council for the Massachusetts Coalition to End Gun Violence. And there's like a number of pieces of legislation that were supporting currently. One is an ACEs bill. It's called the ACEs bill, and it's essentially an act to create alternatives for community emergency resources. So essentially, it's doing that thing like we're like looking to like push folks away from like contacting the police and having, you know, alternatives for that. And there's lots of conversations about what those alternatives can be as well. And so that's huge. And then there's also like a number of like youth justice bills that I'm also working on. And I know I said that I'm part of the Mass Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence. So I just want to say that my gun violence prevention work started a couple of years ago. And it was at a time where I started to really see the interrelationship between essentially, you know, gun violence in our communities and mass incarceration. And so I see it as like both sides of the same coin. And so it's really awesome that through the coalition, I'm able to, you know, work on things that are very specific to mass incarceration. But yeah, just essentially, we want better outcomes for certainly for young people who are, you know, being pushed into a carceral system when there are alternatives still. There's so much research that shows that if there are just certain interventions, that it significantly reduces the likelihood of recidivism. So that is incredibly important to me.
I'm just gonna go next quickly because I have a very similar like line of thinking about what my goals are too. It's like I guess my first, like, I think same with priority, like I think we need to make Boston more equitable and help the communities of color in Boston, especially these communities that have like gun violence at a higher proportionate rate, because those are the people getting incarcerated, and those are people who are having a harder time getting jobs, and those are the people that can't afford to live here like the others in different parts of Boston. So just like definitely think that's a big priority. And I guess like for my goals is like I'm really like heavy on like working with like mass incarcerated people who have been incarcerated and just like helping to end mass incarceration, because it's like such a huge problem in this country that's overlooked so often. And I just like definitely like want to continue like nonprofit work, like helping to gain resources that people who have been incarcerated can have, and also sort of like the before incarceration. So like we're working on like a youth program right now, and I'm like creating the curriculum for it to like, you know, help with like getting these like kids to go to college, and like, you know, just giving them resources to sort of help them and not have them involved in this like community harm circle of that they're involved in, because it's so easy to just get pushed into it. So just working on these like resources and creating spaces that we can just help to like give communities more care that need it. And also just helping them to not have to go through incarceration, because it's so easy in these communities to be exposed to it, the over policing, all of these things. So just working on that. Yeah.
I can go next because I also have something similar. Yeah, so like I'm really passionate about like racial equity, abolition work, and like financial equity and things of that sort. I love everything local. Like that's what gets me going. I just love local elections and everything about like local politics and like local positions and stuff like that. I'm specifically really passionate about like public schools and education policy, and like school boards and things of that sort, school to prison pipeline, working on these issues that I'm really passionate about, but tackling at its root in our public schools. So that's where I see my work going. I know I'm going to move back to Texas, and I'm going to continue the good fight in Texas, in Dallas, hopefully. I know that it's like there's so much going on, and I'm just so passionate about like youth and youth empowerment, and I think that they are the answer and they are the voice that we need, and just everything about that. I know like I kept in contact with a couple of students at my old high school, and like long story short, the issues, you can see so many like racial disparities and just like all the issues of the world highlighted in our schools. Because like right now, they're like they're doing like walkouts and protests like every single day because the administration is like expelling and suspending Black students for speaking up about racial oppression within their school, and how teachers are calling Black students like thugs and stuff like that. And they were just speaking up, and then they just got like expelled and suspended or like forced to transfer schools and stuff like that. So I'm helping out with that. And I hope to go back and just continue that work and helping students and helping youth and navigate all of this and just trying to fix our country in that angle.
Thank you. It was so good to listen to everyone's responses. Like, I just want to say like ditto, and also thank you for doing the work that you're doing. Because I know that we all said we're cynical, but we're also clearly letting the hope side win out, and that gives me more hope too. So anyways, I'm just inspired by like the different parts of the work that folks are doing, and all of it is needed. And I don't think that's emphasized enough, like from the nonprofit grassroots to policymaking coalitions to working directly with our future leaders. Like, these are all things that we need. I would say for me, going back to what I want the mayor to prioritize, a lot of great things were said, but I think a huge one is how to, whoever the next mayor is figuring out the formula, how to work as collaboratively with state government to help get some of the transit equity and environment equity pieces passed, because that's how those pieces are really going to happen, right? It's not going to be solely within city council. So those are just some two other areas. For myself, I think it's to follow through and kind of help within the Asian American Pacific Islander community, just get this infrastructure of getting progressive API women leaders across the political pipeline, having that program in a really good space, because a lot of people say that the community doesn't have an identity. Jamaica could relate to me because we're both Filipino. I'm like, we're also like brown Asians feel differently. So it's a whole thing on being part of a collective identity, but still working on that work. Another huge thing, since I'm in the philanthropic space, like one huge part that I want to help fund is this cross-racial solidarity piece, because I think it's really important, because often our communities are being pitted against each other, not only on the surface level in the messaging, but also financially as well. And that shouldn't be part of the narrative, because that's how white supremacy wins, right? It's their narrative if that happens. And so that's one piece. And then the last piece is actually figuring out a way to get back into the policy space that doesn't have to do with messaging for a candidate, because that's what I've been doing a long time, maybe helping coming up with the policy agenda, doing some messaging around it, but like not doing the organizing work. And that's like a muscle that I've been missing. So I'm trying to figure that out. I have some inspiration from this conversation. So maybe back to voting rights, maybe voting rights specifically for those who are incarcerated, that's also a huge issue that I was really passionate about in the past. So lots of ideas for me on my third piece, and I'll pass it to Sharon.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. I don't have a lot to add. I'm just really inspired to even get out to the polls. And actually, one of the things that I used to do is on election days, I would just give people rides if I didn't have to work that day, kind of like as knowing my own privilege of not having, like in the past, not having to work that day. I was like, all right, if anyone, especially for in my particular town of Ipswich, which is tiny, people who don't have access to the polls are some of the immigrant communities that are closer to the train and the elderly. So those were the groups that I would bring to the polls. So that was kind of the thing that I did.
Hey, thank you all so much. Jamaica, if you want to add anything, it's also, if not, it's all good.
No, I think you all said it. I just, being the only man of color here, like I follow women of color. That's what I'm used to in my culture and my heritage. And seeing obviously the change that happens because of the mothers, the women's, like the, women identifying folks in the community, like that's what I've always been used to in terms of change. So I'm thinking on that. That's what I'm ruminating on. And so it's dope to see all of you on the screen and that validation.
Hey.
Thank you, Jamaica.
Okay, so it is 1:02, but I'm so sad. I love this conversation. I'm definitely gonna email all of you. I want to stay in contact. I love this, and any resources or like what you're working on, would love to like hear about it, become a part of it. And I guess I just want to like end it with this quote, one more Stacey quote, which is when she was asked about like how do you work with like the Republicans, like how do you like work with the people in Georgia that have very different value sets than you. She said, they are my opponent, they are not my enemy, their values are my enemy, and I have to love you to make the world better for you to want to be in it. And I just thought that was such a like beautiful way to put it. So yeah, thank you all so much for being here. I really enjoyed this, and I will hopefully see you again soon.